The barn door slammed shut behind us, and suddenly the world narrowed to just the two of us. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of afternoon light cutting through the wooden slats, illuminating half of Mason's face while shadows claimed the other. His chest was heaving, flannel shirt clinging to his broad shoulders, and those storm-gray eyes were locked on mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Cole," he breathed, my name coming out rough and desperate. "Tell me to stop, tell me right now, or I swear to God," but I couldn't. I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except feel the heat radiating off his massive frame as he took one step closer, then another, backing me against the rough wood of the stable wall. My heart hammered so violently I was certain he could hear it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not between us. Not between best friends who'd known each other since we were kids running barefoot through these same fields. But something had shifted, broken open, and now everything felt different, dangerous, and utterly inevitable. 3 months earlier, none of this existed. Mason Garrett and I were just two ranch hands working the sprawling Triple Crown Ranch in southern Montana, doing what we'd always done since graduating high school 2 years ago, working hard, drinking beer on weekends, and pretending that our lives would somehow expand beyond the endless fence lines and cattle we tended. Mason had been my best friend since 5th grade, back when he was the new kid with the slight southern drawl and the tendency to get into fights, defending anyone who couldn't defend themselves. I'd been the scrappy kid who read too many books and didn't quite fit in with the rougher ranch boys, so naturally we gravitated toward each other by the time we turned 18. Mason had transformed from that lanky, protective kid into something else entirely. He'd shot up to 6'4", with shoulders broad enough to carry hay bales, like they were pillows, and hands that could gentle a spooked horse or fix a broken fence with equal ease. His dark hair was always slightly too long, falling into those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever bullshit anyone tried to feed him. He wore flannel and denim like they were a uniform, his work boots perpetually scuffed, and he had this quiet, grounded presence that made everyone around him feel safe. He was the kind of man other men respected and women openly admired, though he never seemed to notice the attention. Me. I was Cole Rivers, 20 years old, 5'9", with a wiry build that came from ranch work rather than any gym routine. I had sandy blonde hair that refused to cooperate, blue eyes my mom always said were too thoughtful for a cowboy, and a tendency to overthink everything. Where Mason was steady and sure, I was restless and uncertain. Where he was content with the ranch life, I harbored secret dreams of maybe going to college, studying literature or history, seeing something beyond Montana's big sky. But those dreams felt distant and impractical, so I shoved them down and focused on the present, on the work, on maintaining the friendship that had become the most stable thing in my life. The day everything changed started like any other. It was late June, and the Montana summer had hit full force, turning the landscape into shades of gold and green under an impossibly blue sky. The ranch owner, Frank Thornton, had hired a new foreman to oversee operations while he spent more time with his aging wife in town. The position had opened up unexpectedly when the previous foreman retired, and Frank needed someone with experience to manage the 20-odd ranch hands and keep operations running smoothly. When he told us he'd found someone, I didn't think much of it. New people came and went on ranches all the time. Then Garrett Morrison arrived, and everything shifted. Garrett was 32, originally from Texas, and he looked like he'd stepped out of some idealized Western movie. 6'5", with a build that suggested years of physical labor mixed with natural athleticism. He had dark brown hair, a strong jaw perpetually shadowed with stubble, and hazel eyes that could shift from warm to intimidating in a heartbeat. He wore authority like a second skin, moving through the ranch with confident, purposeful strides, assessing everything and everyone with those sharp eyes. Within his first week, he'd reorganized the work schedules, improved the rotation system, and somehow managed to earn the respect of even the most stubborn old-timers who usually resisted any change. He was also unfairly attractive, something I tried desperately not to notice and failed miserably at ignoring. I'd known I was gay since I was 15, a realization that had come with a mixture of terror and relief. Terror because rural Montana wasn't exactly known for its progressive attitudes, and relief because it finally explained why I'd never understood my friends' obsessions with girls. Why I'd felt fundamentally different in ways I couldn't articulate. I'd kept it buried deep, told no one, and certainly never acted on it. In a small ranching community where everyone knew everyone, being different felt dangerous, so I'd learned to hide it, to be careful, to never let my gaze linger too long on the wrong person. Mason knew. He'd figured it out about a year ago when he'd caught me staring a bit too long at one of the ranch visitors. He'd confronted me quietly, away from everyone else, and I'd expected judgment, disgust, maybe the end of our friendship. Instead, he'd just nodded and said, "Okay, doesn't change anything between us," and it hadn't. He'd never treated me differently, never made me feel like I had to hide around him, though I was careful not to make things weird by obviously checking out guys when he was around. But Garrett was impossible not to notice. The foreman seemed to take a particular interest in Mason and me, often assigning us to work together on various projects around the ranch. At first I thought it was because we worked well as a team. We'd been doing it for years, after all, and had developed an easy rhythm that made difficult tasks manageable. But as the weeks progressed, I noticed Garrett watching us, especially during breaks or when we didn't realize anyone was paying attention. His gaze would linger, thoughtful and assessing, in a way that made my skin prickle with awareness. "He's intense," I muttered to Mason one afternoon as we repaired a section of fence on the northern boundary. The sun beat down relentlessly, and we'd both stripped down to t-shirts, our flannel shirts tied around our waists. Mason was driving posts with practiced efficiency, muscles flexing with each swing of the post driver, while I held the posts steady and made sure they were positioned correctly. "Who? Garrett?" Mason paused, wiping sweat from his forehead with his arm, leaving a streak of dirt across his temple. "He's just doing his job. Frank hired him to get things running better, and he is. It's more than that. Haven't you noticed how he watches us?" The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the observation. It sounded paranoid, or worse, like I was hoping to be watched, but Mason just shrugged, seemingly He watches everyone. That's what a good foreman does, keeps track of his crew, figures out who's reliable. He shot me one of his trademark grins, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Besides, we're damn good at what we do. Maybe he's just appreciating quality work." I wanted to believe that's all it was, but something in my gut suggested otherwise. Garrett's attention felt personal somehow, weighted with meanings I couldn't quite decipher. He'd started asking us to handle increasingly complex projects, things that required us to work late or start early, often away from the other ranch hands. We'd repaired the old grain silo, rebuilt the tack room, and spent 3 days clearing brush from the creek bed to prevent flooding. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I couldn't deny that Garrett's management style brought out the best in both of us. What unsettled me more was how Garrett treated Mason specifically. He'd linger when giving Mason instructions, his voice dropping to a lower register that felt almost intimate. He'd clapped Mason on the shoulder in approval, the touch lasting just a fraction longer than necessary. He'd smile at something Mason said with a warmth that seemed to exceed simple professional friendliness, and Mason, oblivious as always, just took it in stride, responding with his typical easy confidence. I told myself I was imagining things, projecting my own awareness onto a situation that was perfectly innocent. Garrett was the foreman. Of course he'd be hands-on with his workers. Of course he'd want to build rapport. It didn't mean anything. But then came the night that shattered my comfortable denial. It was a Friday evening in and most of the ranch hands had headed into town for drinks at the Dusty Boot, the local bar that served as the social hub for everyone within 30 miles. Mason and I had planned to go to, but we'd gotten delayed finishing up a repair on one of the barn doors that had been giving us trouble all day. By the time we'd finally gotten it hung properly and functioning, it was past 8, and the sun was setting in brilliant streaks of orange and pink across the horizon. "Still want to head into town?" Mason asked as we put away the tools in the equipment shed. His hair was tousled from running his hands through it, and there was a smudge of grease on his jaw that he seemed unaware of. He looked tired but satisfied, the way he always did after completing a difficult task. "Honestly, I'm beat. Maybe just grab some beers from the bunkhouse and call it a night." We both lived in the ranch's bunkhouse, a long building divided into individual rooms that housed the unmarried workers. It wasn't fancy, but the rooms were private, and the common area had a decent TV and refrigerator that Frank kept stocked with basics. "Sounds good to me." Mason grinned, falling into step beside me as we headed toward the bunkhouse. "Tommy said he bought some decent beer last week. Not that cheap shit we usually get. Maybe we can steal some of his." We'd almost made it to the bunkhouse when I realized I'd left my phone in the equipment shed. "Damn it, left my phone. I'll catch up with you." I turned back, jogging the short distance to the shed. The door was still slightly ajar from when we'd left, and I slipped inside, the interior dim now that the sun was setting. I'd just grabbed my phone from where it sat on the workbench when I heard voices out close, just beyond the shed's side wall. I froze, not wanting to interrupt what might be a private conversation, but then I recognized Garrett's distinctive drawl. "Been watching you for weeks now." His voice was rough, almost raw. "Tell me I'm reading this wrong. Tell me to back off, and I will. But I see the way you move, the way you work. And I Garrett." That was Mason's voice, but it sounded different, uncertain, almost vulnerable in a way I'd never heard from him. I'm not sure what you want me to say. I want you to be honest. With me, with yourself." There was a pause, and my heart was suddenly hammering. I should leave, should make noise, should do anything except stand here eavesdropping, but I felt rooted to the spot. "I know you feel it too, this thing between us." Another pause, longer this time. When Mason finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I feel it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed myself against the workbench, my phone clutched so tightly in my hand that the edges dug into my palm. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Mason was straight. I'd spent 5 years accepting that fact, building our friendship on that foundation, keeping my own feelings carefully locked away where they couldn't complicate anything. He dated girls occasionally, talked about women he found attractive, showed absolutely no indication that he was anything other than completely, thoroughly heterosexual. Mason's voice cracked slightly. I've never felt like this before, about anyone, and definitely not about a man. That's okay. Garrett's voice had softened, taken on an almost tender quality. That's more than okay. We can take this slow, figure it out together. I just needed to know I wasn't alone in this. I heard movement, the sound of boots scuffing against dirt, and I knew I needed to get out of there before they discovered me. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped out the front door of the shed and took a circuitous route back to the bunkhouse, my mind reeling. By the time I reached my room, my hands were shaking. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing, trying to process what I'd just heard. Mason was attracted to Garrett. Mason, my best friend, my straight best friend, had just admitted to having feelings for a man. The revelation should have been a relief. Maybe it meant he'd understand me better. Maybe it meant I wasn't as alone as I'd always felt. But instead, all I felt was a sick, twisting sensation in my gut that I recognized with horrible clarity as jealousy, because somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without wanting to, I'd fallen in love with Mason Garrett. I'd convinced myself that what I felt was purely friendship, that the way my heart jumped when he smiled at me was just appreciation for having someone who accepted me fully. I'd told myself that the reason I never pursued anyone else was because of the isolation and difficulty, not because no one else measured up to him. I'd buried it so deep that I'd almost believed my own lies. But hearing him talk about Garrett with that vulnerability in his voice, knowing that he was capable of feeling that way about a man, just not about me, it shattered every careful defense I'd constructed. A knock on my door made me jump. "Cole, you find your phone." Mason's voice, casual and familiar, came from the hallway. I took a breath, forced my voice to sound normal. "Yeah, got it. Be out in a minute." I heard his footsteps retreat, and I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to sit there with my eyes closed, breathing through the ache in my chest. Then I stood, splashed some water on my face from the sink in the corner of my room, and went out to face my best friend with a smile that felt like it might crack my face open. Mason was in the common area, already opening to beers he'd snagged from Tommy's stash. He handed me one with that easy grin, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. "Tommy's gonna kill us when he finds out we took his good stuff. We'll buy him more," I said automatically, taking a long drink and trying not to think about where Mason's hands had been 20 minutes ago, whether Garrett had touched him, whether they'd kissed. The beer tasted like ash in my mouth, but I kept drinking anyway. We settled onto the worn couch, and Mason flipped on the TV, finding some baseball game neither of us really cared about. This was our routine, comfortable, familiar, easy, except nothing felt easy anymore. I was hyper-aware of every detail. The way Mason sprawled on the couch with his long legs stretched out, the casual way his arm rested along the back of the cushions behind me, the warmth of his presence that I'd always taken for granted. He was talking about something, some story about one of the horses, but I could barely focus on the words. "You okay?" Mason's question cut through my spiraling thoughts. He was looking at me with concern, those gray eyes searching my face. "You seem off." "Just tired," I lied, forcing another smile. "Long day." He studied me for another moment, then seemed to accept it, turning his attention back to the game. But his arm stayed behind me on the couch, and at some point, without either of us seeming to decide it, I ended up leaning slightly against his shoulder, the way I had 100 times before, except now I was painfully conscious of every point of contact, of how right it felt and how hopeless it was. The next few weeks were torture. Mason started disappearing in the evenings, offering vague explanations about helping Garrett with inventory or checking on the northern pastures. He'd come back late, sometimes not until after midnight, with his hair mussed and his flannel shirt buttoned wrong, a small smile playing at his lips that he tried to hide when he thought I was looking. He never said anything directly, never confirmed what I already knew, but the signs were impossible to miss. Garrett, for his part, seemed almost smug, a knowing gleam in his eyes whenever he gave Mason and me our assignments for the day. He'd started separating us more often, sending Mason on tasks alone while I worked with other ranch hands, and I hated him for it, even as I understood the necessity. They were clearly involved now, whatever that meant, and they needed time together without me hovering in the background like some pathetic third wheel. I threw myself into work, volunteering for extra shifts, taking on the tasks no one else wanted, anything to avoid the quiet moments where my mind would drift to imagining Mason and Garrett together, where the jealousy would rise up and threaten to choke me. The other ranch hands started making jokes about my work ethic, asking if I was saving up for something special or trying to impress someone. I laughed it off, made up some excuse about wanting to build my savings, and kept my head down. But Mason noticed. Of course he noticed. He'd known me too long, could read me too well. "What's going on with you?" he asked one night in late August. We were both in the common area, but unusually we were alone. The other guys had all gone to town for some birthday celebration. Mason had claimed he was too tired, and I'd used the same excuse, though in truth, I'd just wanted to avoid watching him sneak off to meet Garrett again. "Nothing's going on." I didn't look up from the book I was pretending to read. Some Western novel I'd picked up at the ranch's small library of donated paperbacks. Bullshit. Mason's voice was firm, and he reached over to pluck the book from my hands, forcing me to meet his eyes. You've been avoiding me for weeks. Did I do something? Are you pissed at me? Yes, I wanted to scream. I'm furious at you for making me feel this way, for being everything I want and can't have, for finding happiness with someone else while I'm stuck here pretending I'm fine. But I couldn't say any of that. Instead, I shook my head. I'm not avoiding you. We work together every day. That's not the same, and you know it. We used to talk, Cole, really talk. No, you just go through the motions. You're here, but you're not really here. His expression was troubled, almost hurt, and that somehow made it worse. He cared. He genuinely cared that I was pulling away, which only made me feel more guilty for my jealousy. I'm just trying to figure some things out, I said carefully, searching for words that were true without being revealing, about what I want, where I'm going. You know, I've never been sure about the ranch being my forever thing. Mason's expression shifted to something more understanding, though a flicker of sadness passed through his eyes. You're thinking about leaving? Maybe eventually, I don't know. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had been thinking about leaving, especially recently. The thought of watching Mason build a life with Garrett, of being the friend who stayed on the sidelines while they grew closer, felt unbearable. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you need, I get it. But wherever you go, whatever you do, we're still us, right? That doesn't change. I wanted to tell to him that it had already changed, that we could never go back to what we were before I knew the truth. But I just nodded and retrieved my book, effectively ending the conversation. Mason lingered for a few more minutes, then retreated to his room, and I sat there in the silence wondering how much longer I could keep this up. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the beginning of fall roundup preparation. It was the busiest time of year, when we'd gather the cattle from the summer pastures and prepare them for sale or winter feeding. It required all hands working long hours, and I was grateful for the exhaustion that came with it. At least when I was bone-tired, I could sleep without dreams of Mason's hands on someone else's skin. Mason's voice saying someone else's name. It was during roundup that everything finally came to a head. We were bringing in a group of particularly stubborn cattle from one of the remote pastures, a task that required careful coordination and patient herding. Mason and I were paired together for Garrett's assignment, though I suspected it was deliberate, a way to force us to interact after weeks of my careful distance. We'd been working in near silence most of the morning, communicating through hand signals and the shorthand that came from years of partnership. The problem started when one of the younger bulls decided to make a break for it, veering away from the group and heading toward a steep ravine that could be dangerous if he got spooked enough to charge down it. Mason spurred his horse forward immediately, trying to cut the bull off, but the terrain was rocky and uneven. I saw it happening in slow motion, Mason's horse stumbling slightly, Mason leaning forward to compensate, and then the bull turning sharply and charging directly at them. Mason's horse reared in panic, and Mason, caught off balance, went flying backward. He hit the ground hard, the impact audible even over the cattle's bellowing. The bull was still coming, and without thinking, I drove my horse between them, yelling and waving my hat to redirect the bull's attention. It worked. The animal veered away, startled by the sudden movement, and I managed to guide it back toward the herd while simultaneously keeping my horse under control. The whole incident probably lasted less than 30 seconds. But when it was over, my heart was racing like I'd run a marathon. I dismounted quickly, nearly stumbling in my haste to reach Mason, who was sitting up slowly, one hand pressed to his ribs. Are you okay? Jesus, Mason, are you hurt? I dropped to my knees beside him, hands hovering over him, afraid to touch in case something was broken but desperate to assess the damage. I'm fine, he grunted, though his face was pale beneath the tan. Just knocked the wind out of me, and I'm gonna have a hell of a bruise. He tried to laugh, but it came out as more of a wheeze. Don't move, let me check. I started running my hands over his arms and legs, looking for obvious injuries, and I didn't realize how my hands were shaking until Mason caught one of them in his own. Cole, I'm okay really. His voice was gentle, and when I looked up, those gray eyes were fixed on my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. You probably just saved my life. You know, that bull would have trampled me if you hadn't. Don't. The word came out sharper than I intended. Don't talk about it like it's nothing. You could have been killed. Mason, you could have. My voice cracked, and suddenly all the emotion I'd been suppressing for months was rising up, threatening to spill over. Hey, Mason sat up fully despite my protests, his hand still gripping mine. Hey, it's okay. I'm okay, see. Still here, still breathing. He was trying to reassure me, but all I could think about was how close I'd come to losing him. And not just to Garrett, but permanently. How I'd been wasting weeks avoiding him, preserving my own stupid heart when every moment with him was precious and finite. I can't lose you, I whispered. And it was both too much and not enough of the truth. Something in Mason's expression shifted, softened and intensified all at once. You won't. Cole, you're my best friend. Nothing's going to change that. But it already had. I was staring at him, at the dirt smudged on his cheek and the concern in his eyes and the way his hand felt wrapped around mine, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. That's not what I mean. The words hung between us, loaded with everything I'd been hiding. Mason's eyes widened slightly, and I saw the moment understanding began to dawn. Cole, forget it. I pulled my hand away and stood up quickly, needing distance, needing air. We should get back. You need to see a doctor. Make sure nothing's broken. I turned away, focusing on catching his horse, which had wandered a short distance away. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed the reins. Cole, wait. Mason was on his feet now too, moving more slowly but with determination. What did you mean? It doesn't matter. I couldn't look at him. Afraid of what I'd see, pity, discomfort, the end of everything we'd been to each other. But hell, it doesn't. He was in front of me now, blocking my path to the horses. His hand came up to my chin, gently forcing me to meet his eyes. Tell me what you meant. The touch undid me. I jerked away like I'd been burned. You really want to do this now, here? My voice was rising, all the frustration and hurt of the past months pouring out. Fine. I'm in love with you, okay? I have been for longer than I want to admit, and I know you're with Garrett. I know you're happy. And I've been trying so damn hard to be okay with it, to be the supportive friend. But seeing you almost die just now made me realize I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that I'm fine watching you with someone else. I can't. I'm not with Garrett. Mason's words cut through my spiral, quiet but definitive. I stared at him. What? I'm not with Garrett. We're not together. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his tell for when he was working through something difficult. We talked a few times. He made it clear he was interested, and I thought maybe I was too. I'd never felt that way about a guy before, and it confused the hell out of me. But every time we got close to actually doing anything, I'd freeze up, because it didn't feel right. But you've been disappearing with him, coming back late. We were talking, just talking. He was helping me figure out some things about myself. Mason's laugh was short and slightly bitter. Turned out what I needed to figure out was why I couldn't let myself feel anything for him. Why every time he got close, I'd think about someone else. My heart was doing something complicated and painful in my chest. What are you saying? I'm saying it took me way too long to realize that the reason I couldn't be with Garrett was because I was already hung up on someone else. Someone I've known for years. Someone who knows me better than anyone. Someone who just risked his life to save mine without a second thought. He took a step closer, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I'm saying I'm an idiot who didn't realize he was in love with his best friend until someone else tried to make a move. Mason, his name came out as barely a whisper. I know I have no right to tell you this now, after you've been hurting because of me, and I know I'm new to this, to understanding that what I feel for you is more than friendship. But Cole, if there's any chance, he broke off, vulnerability written across every line of his face, is there any chance you still want me? Even knowing I'm going to be terrible at this at first, even knowing I'm figuring this out as I go, I should have been cautious. I should have asked 100 questions, made him explain exactly what he meant, protected myself against the possibility of more hurt. But I'd spent months being careful, and I was so tired of denying what I wanted. So instead, I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate, tasting of dust and adrenaline. Mason made a surprised sound against my mouth. Then his arms came around me, pulling me closer as he kissed me back with an intensity that made my knees weak. His hand cupped the back of my head, fingers threading through my hair, and I gripped the front of his shirt like it was the only thing keeping me upright. We broke apart after a moment that felt both eternal and far too brief, both of us breathing hard. Okay, Mason said, his voice rough. Okay, I was definitely missing out on something. I laughed, the sound shaky but genuine, and pressed my forehead against his chest. You're such an idiot. Yeah, but I'm your idiot. His arms tightened around me. If you'll have me. We need to talk about this, I said, even as I made no move to pull away. Really about what this means, about what we're doing. I know, and we will. But right now, he pulled back just enough to look at my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with such tenderness it made my throat tight. Right now, I just need you to know that I'm all in. Whatever this is, wherever it goes, I want it. I want you. We stood there in the middle of the pasture, cattle milling around us, horses waiting patiently, and for the first time in months, the weight in my chest eased. But even as relief flooded through me, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. This changes everything, and not everyone is going to be happy about it. I pushed the thought away and let Mason kiss me again. Softer this time, full of promise. We'd deal with the complications later. For now, this was enough. The ride back to the ranch was surreal. Mason insisted he was fine despite my protests, and we finished gathering the remaining cattle before heading in. We rode side by side, occasionally catching each other's eyes and smiling like a couple of fools. Every time our horses got close enough that our legs nearly brushed, I felt a spark of awareness that was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. This was real. Mason had feelings for me, had kissed me, wanted me. It still felt impossible as we approached the ranch proper. Reality began to creep back in. Mason seemed to sense my thoughts because he reached over and briefly squeezed my hand. Hey, we're good. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. I nodded, wanting to believe him, but uncertainty gnawed at me. We lived in a small, conservative community. We worked on a ranch where traditional masculinity was the unspoken code. Coming out was one thing when it was abstract, theoretical, but this, being in a relationship with another ranch hand, being visible and vulnerable to judgment and potential hostility, that was something else entirely. We'd just finished unsaddling our horses when Garrett appeared, his expression tight with concern. Heard there was an incident with the bull. Everyone okay? Yeah, just a close call. Cole handled it. Mason's voice was casual, but I caught the slight stiffness in his posture. Things were clearly still awkward between them. Garrett's gaze moved between us, and I wondered what he saw. Could he tell something had changed? Did he notice the way Mason positioned himself slightly closer to me than strictly necessary? The way I was hyper-aware of every inch of space between us? Good. Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mason, can I have a word? Privately. My stomach dropped, but Mason just nodded. Sure, Cole, I'll catch up with you later. I wanted to protest, wanted to stay close, but I had no claim to make that demand. Not publicly, not yet. So I nodded and headed toward the bunkhouse, every step feeling like I was leaving something unresolved and potentially explosive behind me. I tried to distract myself in my room, but after 20 minutes of pacing and checking my phone, I gave up and headed back out. I'd just stepped into the common area when Mason walked in, his expression troubled. What did he want? The question came out more sharply than I intended. Mason ran a hand through his hair, that telltale gesture of frustration. He knows about us. Well, he guessed. Anyway, said he could tell by the way we looked at each other when we rode in, and he's not happy about it. Mason sank onto the couch and I sat beside him, close enough that our thighs touched. He didn't make any threats or anything, but he made it clear he thinks it's a bad idea. I said workplace relationships are complicated, especially in our situation. Did he mention that he was literally pursuing you just weeks ago? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Yeah, I threw that back at him. He said that was different because he's the foreman and can afford to be out, whereas we're just ranch hands who depend on the goodwill of everyone around us. Mason's expression was conflicted, and as much as I hate to admit it, he's not wrong. If we do this, it's going to be complicated. Fear clawed at my throat. Are you having second thoughts? What? No. Mason turned to face me fully, his hands coming up to frame my face. Cole, I want you to understand what we're walking into. I want to make sure you're ready for it. I leaned into his touch, letting my eyes close for a moment. I've been ready for this longer than you have. The question is whether you're ready. I'm terrified, he admitted quietly. I've spent my whole life being one thing, being certain about who I was, and now everything's different. But when I'm with you, it feels right in a way nothing else ever has. So yeah, I'm ready, or at least, I'm willing to try. That would have to be enough. I kissed him softly, just a brief press of lips, mindful that anyone could walk into the common area at any moment. Then we'll figure it out. We decided to keep things quiet at first, not out of shame but out of practicality. We needed time to navigate this new dynamic ourselves before exposing it to external scrutiny. It meant stolen moments and careful discretion, brushing hands when no one was looking, lingering gazes across the dinner table, late-night conversations in one or the other's room when everyone else was asleep. It was thrilling and frustrating in equal measure. Every innocent touch felt electric. Every time Mason smiled at me with that new warmth in his eyes, my heart would do acrobatics. But the secrecy chafed. I wanted to hold his hand in public, to kiss him goodnight without checking over my shoulder, to just be with him without the constant weight of hiding. About a week after the incident with the bull, Mason and I were assigned to repair one of the old equipment sheds on the eastern edge of the property. It was far enough from the main ranch that we were essentially alone, with only the occasional sound of distant cattle to remind us we weren't completely isolated. We'd been working in companionable silence for most of the morning, replacing rotten boards and reinforcing the structure's frame. Hand me the level, Mason asked from his perch on the ladder, and I grabbed it from the toolbox, climbing up beside him to pass it over. We were close on the narrow ladder, closer than strictly necessary, and when his hand brushed mine taking the level, neither of us pulled away. You're making it very hard to concentrate on work, Mason murmured, his eyes fixed on mine rather than the board he was supposedly checking. Me, you're the one who keeps looking at me like that. Like what? Like you want to? I broke off, suddenly uncertain. We'd kissed several times since that first day, but we hadn't really pushed beyond that. Mason was still figuring things out, and I didn't want to pressure him into anything he wasn't ready for. Like I want to what? Mason set the level down and turned to face me fully, which was a precarious move on the ladder, but he managed it. Say it, Cole. Like you want to kiss me, I finished quietly. That's because I do. He leaned in slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull back if I wanted to. I didn't want to. Our lips met, and this kiss was different from the others, less desperate, more exploratory. Mason's hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking along my cheekbone as he deepened the kiss. I made a small sound in the back of my throat, and he responded by pressing closer, until we were thoroughly unbalanced on the ladder. We broke apart laughing as we both scrambled to keep from falling. Okay, probably shouldn't make out on ladders, Mason said, his cheeks flushed and his eyes bright. Definitely a safety hazard, I agreed, climbing down to solid ground. Mason followed, but instead of going back to work, he caught my hand and pulled me around the side of the shed, into the shadows where we'd be even less visible if anyone happened to approach. I've been wanting to do this properly, he said, backing me gently against the shed wall. His hands bracketed my hips, not quite touching but close enough that I could feel the heat of them through my jeans, without worrying about falling or being interrupted. His name came out breathy, and I saw his pupils dilate in response. Tell me if this is too much, he said, and then he was kissing me again, slower and more thorough than before. His hand slid up my sides, under my flannel to the t-shirt beneath, and even that simple touch made me shiver. I wrapped my arms around his neck, fingers tangling in his hair, and lost myself in the sensation of being wanted by the person I'd wanted for so long. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against mine. I don't have a lot of experience with this, with guys, with you, so you're going to have to be patient with me. I've been patient for 5 years. I think I can manage a bit longer. I smiled, then grew more serious. But Mason, you need to tell me what you're comfortable with, what you want. I don't want to push you into anything. What I want, he said slowly, is everything eventually. But right now, I just want to be with you, to learn what makes you happy, to figure this out together. He pulled back slightly, studying my face. Is that okay? That's more than okay. I pulled him back in for another kiss, softer this time, just savoring the moment. We stayed like that for several minutes, trading lazy kisses and quiet touches, until the distant sound of a truck engine reminded us we were supposed to be working. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. We'd work during the day, maintaining our usual professional dynamic around others, but whenever we could steal a moment alone, a quiet corner of the barn, a secluded stretch of fence line, the equipment shed that had become our unofficial sanctuary, we'd come together with an intensity that still surprised me. Mason was a quick learner, and while he still occasionally hesitated or pulled back when things got too intense too quickly, he was clearly becoming more comfortable with the physical aspects of our relationship. But the emotional intimacy we were developing was even more significant. We'd always been close, but now there was a new vulnerability between us. Mason talked about his confusion over realizing he was attracted to men, his worry about disappointing his family back in Texas who had very traditional expectations. I shared my own long journey of acceptance, the loneliness of keeping such a fundamental part of myself hidden for years. We planned tentative futures, maybe getting our own place eventually, away from the bunkhouse where privacy was limited. Maybe even leaving Montana altogether if we needed to, finding somewhere we could just be ourselves without constantly looking over our shoulders. It felt like building something real and lasting. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself hope, but hope, I was learning, was a fragile thing. The trouble started in mid-October, during the ranch's annual harvest celebration. It was a tradition Frank Thornton had maintained for decades, a big barbecue and bonfire for all the ranch hands and their families. A way to mark the end of the busy season and the beginning of the quieter winter months. Everyone came, workers, families, even some of the local townspeople who had connections to the ranch. There was food, music, and plenty of alcohol, and it was generally considered one of the best events of the year. Mason and I had been looking forward to it. Even though we knew we'd have to maintain our careful distance, just being able to see each other in a social setting, to steal glances across the fire and maybe find a quiet moment away from the crowd, felt like enough. But I should have known nothing was ever that simple. The evening started well enough. The weather was perfect, crisp but not cold, with a clear sky showing off the Milky Way in all its glory. The bonfire crackled and sent sparks spiraling up into the darkness, and the smell of grilled meat and wood smoke filled the air. Mason and I arrived separately, mingling with different groups to avoid any appearance of being too attached. I caught glimpses of him throughout the evening, laughing with some of the older ranch hands, helping Frank's wife carry more food out to the tables, completely at ease in a way I envied. I was talking with a couple of the guys from the South Range when I felt someone's presence behind me. I turned to find Garrett, beer in hand, his expression unreadable. "Cole, mind if I steal you for a minute?" It wasn't really a request, and the other ranch hands scattered quickly, leaving us alone at the edge of the firelight. I tensed, uncertain what was coming. "I've been watching you and Mason," Garrett said without preamble. "You've been careful, but not careful enough. I can see what's happening between you." "Garrett," he held up a hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Actually, I wanted to apologize for how I handled things with Mason. I shouldn't have pursued him the way I did, especially when I was his superior. It was inappropriate, and I put him in a difficult position." The apology caught me off guard. "Oh, thank you for saying that. But I also need to warn you." His expression grew more serious. "There are people here tonight who wouldn't be understanding if they figured out what's going on, and some of them have been drinking enough to make them bold about sharing their opinions." As if on cue, a burst of raucous laughter came from near the bonfire. I looked over to see a group of the rougher ranch hands, guys who'd always made me slightly uncomfortable with their casual use of slurs and their aggressive posturing about masculinity. Mason was near them, not part of their group, but close enough to be within earshot. You see what I mean? Garrett's voice was quiet. I'm not saying you two need to hide forever, but tonight might not be the night to be careless. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me with a cold knot of anxiety in my gut. I watched the group near the fire, trying to gauge the situation. They seemed harmless enough, just drunk and rowdy. But Garrett's warning had me on edge. I was making my way back toward the main crowd when I heard Ita's voice raised in mock falsetto, followed by more laughter. "Oh, Mason, you're so strong. Help me with this fence post." More laughter, and then a different voice. "Careful. Boys wouldn't want to give him the wrong idea. Might think you're sweet on him." I froze, my blood running cold. Had someone seen us? Said something? I scanned the group and saw Mason's expression carefully blank, but I could read the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. One of the drunk ranch hands, a guy in his 30s who'd always given me a bad vibe, stumbled to his feet. "What do you think, Mason? You into that kind of thing? Because I swear I've seen you and that cold kid getting awfully friendly lately." The crowd had gone quiet, that particular silence that meant everyone was paying attention even if they were pretending not to. Mason's voice was level, almost bored, when he responded. "You're drunk, Travis. Maybe you should go sleep it off. Answer the question." Travis was belligerent now, emboldened by alcohol and audience. "You one of them queers, because we don't need that kind of thing around here." Everything in me wanted to rush forward, to defend Mason, to tell Travis exactly where he could shove his bigotry, but doing so would only confirm his suspicions, would make everything worse. I was paralyzed, trapped between the need to protect Mason and the knowledge that intervention would expose us both. Mason stood slowly, his full height impressive even among the tall ranch hands. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "What I am is tired of listening to drunk assholes make accusations. You want to know who I spend my time with? That's my business. You got a problem with how I do my job? I got a problem with you being a... That's enough." Frank Thornton's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The ranch owner had appeared from somewhere, his weathered face stern. "Travis, you're done for the night. Go home and sober up. We don't tolerate that kind of talk on my ranch." Travis looked like he wanted to argue, but even drunk, he knew better than to cross Frank. He stumbled away, muttering under his breath, and gradually the party resumed its previous noise level. Though the atmosphere had been irrevocably changed, I wanted to go to Mason, but he'd already disappeared into the darkness beyond the firelight. I waited a few minutes, then casually made my way in the same direction, my heart hammering. I found him behind one of the equipment sheds, his hands braced against the wall, head bowed. "Mason, don't." His voice was raw. "Don't say it's going to be okay, or that it doesn't matter what they think, because it does matter. This is my life, Cole. These people, this place, it's all I've ever known, and now it's complicated." I finished quietly. "I know, I'm sorry." He turned to face me, and even in the dim light, I could see the conflict in his expression. Maybe Garrett was right. Maybe this is too hard. Maybe we're making a mistake, don't. Now it was my turn to cut him off. I moved closer, stopping just short of touching him. "Don't let one bigoted arsehole make you question this. Question us. It's not just him though, is it? It's everyone who thinks like him. Everyone who'll look at us differently if they know. Everyone who'll make our lives hell because we're..." He broke off, struggling with the words. "Because we're together," I said firmly. "Because we love each other. And yes, it's hard. Yes, some people are going to be assholes about it. But Mason, I've been alone with this for years, and I can't go back to that. I won't, and I don't think you can either, now that you know what this feels like." He stared at me for a long moment, then pulled me into a fierce hug. "I'm scared," he admitted against my hair. "Me too." I held him tightly, trying to transfer every ounce of certainty I could muster. "But we're scared together. That has to count for something." We stood like that until the cold drove us back toward the warmth of the fire, carefully separating before we came into view. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but the damage was done. Travis's drunken accusations had planted seeds of suspicion, and I could feel eyes on us whenever Mason and I were in the same vicinity. The next few days were tense. Travis had apparently sobered up enough to be embarrassed by his behavior, and he kept his distance. But the atmosphere on the ranch had shifted. Conversations would stop when Mason or I entered a room. People were watching us more carefully, looking for confirmation of what Travis had suggested. Mason and I had an unspoken agreement to be extra cautious, but it was killing us both. We barely spoke except for work-related matters. Never touched, maintained careful distance. At night, when I knew most of the bunkhouse was asleep, Mason would slip into my room or I'd go to his, and we'd hold each other in the darkness, not talking, just needing the contact to prove this was still real. "We can't keep doing this," Mason whispered one night as we lay tangled together on his narrow bed. "Something's got to give." "What are you suggesting?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, my Lisa, my room here is up at the end of November. What if I don't renew it? What if we find a place in town, somewhere we can actually be ourselves? Hope flared in my chest. You mean that? Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot. We can still work here, commute in every day, but we'd have our own space. Privacy, we could actually live together, not just steal moments when no one's looking. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me. What do you think? I think that sounds perfect. I pulled him down for a kiss, and for the first time in days, the knot of anxiety in my chest loosened slightly. We started looking at rentals in town the next week, using our days off to drive the 20 miles to the nearest town with actual housing options. It was a small place, barely more than a few blocks of businesses surrounded by scattered homes and ranches. But it had what we needed, anonymity and space. We found a small house at the edge of town. A 2-bedroom place that was old but solid, with a front porch and a decent yard. The landlord, an elderly woman who seemed more interested in having reliable tenants than in their personal lives, agreed to rent to us starting December 1st. It's really happening, Mason said as we drove back to the ranch after signing the lease. He had one hand on the wheel and the other resting on my thigh. A casual intimacy we could only afford when we were safely alone in his truck. We're really doing this, having second thoughts. Not even a little. He squeezed my leg gently. For the first time since this all started, I feel like I can breathe. The remaining weeks of November passed in a blur of work and packing. We were careful not to make it obvious we were moving in together. Mason told people he wanted his own place off the ranch for privacy, and I said I was looking for somewhere quieter since the bunkhouse was getting too crowded. Whether anyone believed us was unclear, but at least they couldn't prove anything. Garrett pulled me aside a few days before we were set to move. I heard you and Mason found a place. Yeah, I wasn't sure where this was going, so I kept my response neutral. Good, I think it's the right call. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Look, I know I wasn't exactly supportive at first. I had my reasons, some valid, some not, but I can see how you look at each other, and I hope it works out for you both. Thank you. The words were sincere, and Garrett, thanks for the warning at the bonfire. We've been more careful since then. Just keep being careful, at least until you're off ranch property regularly. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt like benediction and farewell combined. And Cole, take care of him. He's figuring a lot of stuff out, and he's going to need someone patient. I know, I will. Moving day arrived cold and clear, with frost coating the grass and our breath visible in the morning air. Neither of us had much to move: a few pieces of furniture, boxes of clothes and personal items, some kitchen supplies. We made several trips in Mason's truck, and by early afternoon, we were standing in our new living room, surrounded by boxes but finally alone. So this is home, Mason said, looking around at the space that was simultaneously too empty and full of possibility. This is home, I echoed, and the word had never felt more right. We spent the rest of the day unpacking and arranging furniture, arguing good-naturedly about where things should go and discovering small quirks about the house: a window that stuck, a floorboard that creaked, a closet that was oddly deep. By evening, we'd made enough progress that the place felt livable, if not quite settled. We ordered pizza from the town's only pizza place and ate it sitting on the living room floor, our backs against the couch we'd positioned in front of the small fireplace. Mason had gotten the fire going, and the warmth and crackling of the wood created a cocoon of comfort around us. I keep waiting for someone to burst in, Mason admitted, to interrupt or tell us we can't do this. No one's coming. It's just us. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. This is real, Mason. We made it real. He turned his head to press a kiss to my temple. Yeah, we did. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I need to tell you something. The serious note in his voice made me straighten up. Okay, I love you. The words came out rushed, like he'd been holding them in for too long. I know I'm new to all this, and I know I'm probably doing everything wrong, but I love you, Cole. I think I have for a while. I just didn't understand what it was. My throat felt tight, my eyes stinging. You're not doing anything wrong, and I love you too, so damn much. We kissed then, slow and deep, and it felt different from all the stolen kisses before. This was ours, our home, our time, our choice. When we finally broke apart, Mason stood and held out his hand. Come with me. I let him pull me to my feet and lead me down the short hallway to the bedroom we designated as ours. We'd put the bed together earlier, made it up with new sheets we'd bought in town. The room was simple: just the bed, a dresser, a bedside table, but it was more than I'd ever hoped to have. Mason turned to face me, his hands coming up to cup my face. I want this, you, all of it. And I know I might freak out sometimes, or move too slow, or too fast, but I silenced him with a kiss. We'll figure it out together. That's all that matters. What happened next was tender and awkward and perfect in all the ways that mattered. Mason was hesitant at first, clearly nervous despite his earlier declaration. But we took our time, learning each other with patient hands and whispered reassurances. When we finally came together, it felt like a promise being kept, a future being built. a home being made in each other rather than just in the walls around us. Afterward, we lay tangled together, Mason's head on my chest, my fingers running through his hair. The fire had burned down 2 embers in the other room, and the house had grown quiet around us. "Thank you," Mason said softly. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for not giving up when I was too stupid to see what was right in front of me." He propped himself up to look at me, his expression serious. "I know this won't always be easy. I know we'll face shit from people who don't understand or don't approve. But I also know that I'd rather face all of that with you than be without you." "Good," I said, pulling him down for another kiss. "Because you're stuck with me now." He laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "I can live with that." We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely at peace. The next few months were an adjustment. We still worked at the ranch, still dealt with the curious looks and occasional hostile comment. But having our own space made it bearable. We could come home at the end of the day and just be ourselves. No hiding, no pretending. We cooked dinners together, argued over what to watch on TV, learned each other's habits and quirks in the way only cohabitation allows. Mason had his moments of doubt, times when the weight of everything would get to him. There was the night he'd run into some old friends from high school who'd made pointed comments about the roommate he'd moved in with. There was the Sunday his mother had called and asked when he was going to find a nice girl and settle down, and he'd had to dodge the question because he wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. There were the looks we'd get sometimes when we were in town together, the way some people would suddenly remember they needed to be elsewhere when they realized we were more than just friends. But there were good moments too. The owner of the local diner who'd sized us up on our second visit and said, "You boys want separate checks or together?" with a knowing smile, then proceeded to treat us exactly like any other couple who came in. The elderly woman next door who'd brought over cookies as a housewarming gift and invited us to her holiday party without a hint of judgment. The gradual realization that while some people would never accept us, there were others who would, and those were the ones worth knowing. By the time spring rolled around, we'd settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. We were careful at work but not paranoid, affectionate at home but not reckless. We were building a life together, piece by piece, day by day. It was on a Saturday morning in April that Mason brought up the topic I'd been waiting for. We were having coffee on the front porch, watching the sun burn off the morning mist, when he said, "I've been thinking about telling my parents." I set my mug down carefully. I mean, not over the phone. I think I need to go back to Texas, see them in person." He looked at me, nervous but determined. "And I want you to come with me. I want them to meet you, to understand that this isn't some phase or confusion, that you're it. For me, that's a big step. I know, and I'm terrified, but I'm also tired of hiding this huge part of my life from them. They're going to find out eventually, and I'd rather it come from me than through some gossip chain." He reached over and took my hand. "Will you come with me?" "Of course I will. Whatever you need, I'm there." We planned the trip for early May, after the spring calving season was complete and we could both take a week off. The drive to Mason's hometown in Texas took 2 days, and Mason grew progressively quieter as we got closer. I didn't push him to talk, just held his hand when I was driving and let him do the same when our positions were reversed. His parents' ranch was smaller than the Triple Crown but well-maintained, with a neat farmhouse and well-tended pastures. His mother Sarah was waiting on the porch when we pulled up, and she pulled Mason into a tight hug the moment he got out of the truck. "It's so good to see you, honey. You don't visit nearly enough." She turned to me with a warm smile. "And you must be cold. Mason's told us so much about you." "Had he?" I glanced at Mason, who looked slightly panicked, and I realized his mother meant the friendship he'd mentioned over the years, not anything more recent. This was going to be even harder than I'd thought. Dinner that night was pleasant but tense. Mason's father, Robert, was a quiet man who sized me up with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent his life reading livestock and people with equal skill. His younger sister Emma, home from college for the weekend, was bright and talkative, filling any silences with chatter about her classes and friends. But underneath it all, I could feel Mason's anxiety building. Could see it in the way he barely touched his food and kept shooting me uncertain glances. After dinner, Mason finally said, "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." The change in atmosphere was immediate. Sarah and Robert exchanged glances, and Emma grew quiet. We moved to the living room, and Mason sat beside me on the couch, so close our thighs touched. I could feel him trembling slightly. "I don't really know how to say this," Mason started, his voice unsteady, "so I'm just going to say it. Cole and I, we're together. As in, we're dating. We're in a relationship. We live together back in Montana." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. Robert's expression remained carefully neutral, but I could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. Emma's eyes went wide, but there was something like understanding in them.
"How long?"
Sarah's voice was faint. "Since last fall, but we've been friends for years before that." "And you're—" Robert struggled with the words. "You're saying you're gay?" "I guess so. I'm still figuring that out, but I know how I feel about Cole. I love him, and I needed you to know." What followed was one of the most painful hours of my life. Mason's parents weren't cruel. They didn't disown him, didn't throw us out. But they were deeply confused and clearly struggling, Sarah cried. Robert asked questions that ranged from concerned to slightly accusatory. Was Mason sure? Had something happened to make him this way? Had I somehow influenced him? Mason defended our relationship with a fierce protectiveness that made my heart ache, even as his parents' reactions made me want to disappear. Finally, Emma broke in. Mom, Dad, stop. You're acting like Mason just told you he's a serial killer. He's in love. That's a good thing, not something to interrogate him about. You don't understand, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. This changes everything. It doesn't change Mason, Emma shot back. He's the same person he was yesterday. You're just learning something new about him. Eventually, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, we all went to bed. Mason and I were given separate rooms. A pointed statement about his parents' discomfort, but Mason slipped into my room once the house was quiet. I'm sorry, he whispered, climbing into bed beside me. I'm so sorry you had to sit through that. Don't apologize. You were brave tonight. And Emma was amazing. She was, wasn't she? A hint of fondness crept into his voice. I should have known she'd be cool about it. We held each other in the darkness, and I could feel the dampness of his tears on my shirt. Are you okay? I asked softly. I don't know. I knew it would be hard, but hearing my mom cry, seeing my dad look at me like I'm a stranger, his voice cracked. I just hope it gets better. It will. They need time to adjust. But Mason, they didn't reject you. They didn't kick us out. That's something. The rest of the week was tense, but gradually improving. Mason's parents were clearly trying, asking careful questions and making an effort to include me in family activities. There was one breakthrough moment when Sarah pulled me aside while Mason and his dad were out checking on some cattle. I need you to understand something, Cole. This isn't about you personally. You seem like a nice young man, but this is my son, and I'm scared for him. The world isn't kind to people like to people in your situation. She struggled with words but pushed through. I just want him to be safe and happy. So do I said quietly. I love him, Mrs. Garrett, and I promise you I'll do everything I can to take care of him. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded and squeezed my hand. It wasn't acceptance, not quite, but it was a start. By the time we left Texas, things were still complicated but less hostile. Mason's parents promised to visit Montana in the summer to see our home and maybe understand better. Emma made us promise to stay in touch, and she gave me a fierce hug before we left, whispering, "Take care of my brother." The drive home was quieter than the drive there, but it was a peaceful quiet rather than an anxious one. Mason seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted, even though he knew there was still work to be done. "Thank you for coming with me," he said as we crossed back into Montana. "I couldn't have done that alone." "You could have," I said honestly, "but I'm glad I was there." He reached over and laced his fingers through mine. I love you too." When we got back to our little house, everything felt more real than before. This was our life, built on honesty and courage and love. It wouldn't always be easy, we both knew that, but we'd faced one of the hardest challenges together, and we'd come through it. That night, as we lay in our bed in our home, Mason turned to me and said, "I want to tell people at the ranch officially. No more hiding, no more careful distance. I just want to be us. Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm tired of hiding, and if some people have a problem with it, well, that's their problem, not ours." So the next Monday, when Garrett asked how our trip went, Mason said clearly it was good. "We told my family about us, that Cole and I are together." Garrett's eyebrows rose, but he just nodded. "How did that go?" "About as well as could be expected. We're working through it." Mason glanced at me, then back at Garrett. "And I wanted to let you know officially, Cole and I are in a relationship. We live together off ranch. It won't affect our work, but we're not hiding it anymore." For a moment, I thought Garrett might object or lecture us about professionalism, but instead he just smiled slightly and said, "Noted. And for what it's worth, I hope it works out for you both." Word spread quickly, as it always does in small communities. Some people avoided us. Some made supportive comments or asked questions with genuine curiosity. A few made it clear they didn't approve, but Frank Thornton made an equally clear statement that anyone who had a problem with his workers' personal lives could find employment elsewhere. It wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. And through it all, Mason and I had each other. We'd come home at the end of each day to our house, our space, our life together. We'd cook dinner and talk about our day and make plans for the future. We'd fall asleep tangled together and wake up the same way. It wasn't the story I'd imagined when I first realized I loved him. It was harder in some ways, more complicated, requiring more courage than I'd known I possessed. But it was also more beautiful, more real, more worth fighting for than I could have ever anticipated. One evening in late summer, we were sitting on our front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mason had his arm around me, and I was leaning into his solid warmth, and everything felt perfectly right. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Choosing this, choosing me." Mason was quiet for a moment, but when he spoke, his voice was firm and sure. "Not for a second. Yeah, it's been hard sometimes. Yeah, we've faced shit I never imagined we'd have to deal with. But Cole, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Loving you, being with you, it's the most honest I've ever been in my life. So no, I don't regret it. I'd choose you 1,000 times over. I turned to kiss him, long and slow and sweet, and when we broke apart, I said, "Good, because you're stuck with me." He laughed. That warm, unguarded sound I'd grown to love more than anything. I'm counting on it. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, we sat together in comfortable silence. Two young men who'd found each other against all odds and built something worth keeping. The future was uncertain, it always would be, but we'd face it together. The virgin cowboy who'd found his courage and the man who'd loved him long before he was ready to be loved, and that, more than anything, felt like coming home. The end. Or is it? If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or gave you hope, I'd love to hear from you. Please like, subscribe, and comment below. Your support means everything and helps me create more stories like this. What moment hit you the hardest? When Mason fell from his horse, the coming out scene, the first kiss at the old barn. Share your thoughts in the comments. Should I tell you what happened next? Would you want to see their life together after this? Mason meeting Cole's family, their first anniversary. Let me know if you want a part 2, and I'll make it happen. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.